Hello. On today's video, I will be showing you the major impact of degradation on a rubbery compound that was used to cover mechanical part in a dehumidifier. First of all, it's important to understand what and why this matters, this kind of degradation. First of all, just about any rubbery compound has a certain life to it, and we know this pretty well, and we expect at least 5 or 7 years of carefree stability. Unfortunately, there are some situations when poor, let's say, chemical formulations are being used, and probably due to being cheaper to manufacture certain products this way, it ends up as being less of a stable material. And this matters quite a lot because you have seen how some older, let's say, products, it doesn't matter whether they are laptops, cameras, all sorts of devices, can have a large impact on their life just because a certain material that was rubbery in its nature degraded. So we have this material that covered the copper pipe, and that, as you can readily see, over here it's a piece of paper that sticked to the surface that is degrading, however, very strongly, and I would say it's surprising because it's less than 2 years product. It sticks to the hand. Over here it's not really dirt, it's the fact that this rubbery compound became something like plasticine or Play-Doh or putty or whatever kind of material you may think with this consistency. I'm sorry that sometimes you may not see this material properly, but I don't have much, let's say, ability in showing it in its true nature. You think about something like a melty, sticky rubber material, and this is what happens. The material initially had some sort of elasticity, but of course some sort of consistency as well. Right now, both of these qualities have been lost, and the material became so degraded that it almost feels like it melted. And this means, and as you can probably see, my fingerprints can be noticed on the surface. So it's degraded so much that really it has no sort of mechanical strength or stability. In that, it was almost certainly a bad idea to let it be in that device from which I extracted it. I have to say that the surprise of finding such a material degrade so fast, I mean, I was expecting 2 years to be entirely impossible. I was thinking about 5 years, carefree operation at least, but I noticed that in around 2 years, and we have to think about a product that is already under warranty, as the European Union regulations state, this rubbery covering was already degrading. Of course, you would have to enter the device to see such a degradation taking place, and you would not have any sort of indication if this situation was occurring. However, it's very interesting because ultimately we are expecting our products to have at least a certain level of quality. Unfortunately, moving production to China wasn't particularly the main reason why this thing happened, but I think that it was more or less a competition to manufacture the cheapest possible product, and this meant that poor materials had to be chosen. And of course, this was to ensure the highest possible profits, because you are quite aware that a product that is manufactured in China and sold for a various price around the world, not only in Europe, in America, in wealthy Asian nations like South Korea or Japan, ultimately means that such corners had to be cut. And this meant that the product is probably manufactured for less than half, probably a quarter of its actual selling price, and the rest is profit. It may be even worse than that, up to a tenth of its price, but probably not for devices that are reasonably complex. So the important part is the following. When we are, let's say, accepting of manufacturing such products at a very low price and with no oversight on what the end product actually gets to behave, we end up with materials that are obviously going to be much below the standard quality level that you might expect. So, what can I say? The impact of this let's say strategy, although I wouldn't quite consider it strategy in a good way, is that we end up with products that can become defective in a premature way. Of course, this would not have affected the product as much in another couple of months, so it probably would have survived warranty with no problem, because ultimately this degradation was not in a place where it would have mattered that much. You would not see melting rubber getting into the device. Of course, it was a relatively warmer area, but nothing out of ordinary. I mean, you can have rubbery materials working in conditions where steam forms. So temperatures over 80 to 90 degrees are possible. In this case, it was around 40. So far from being this problem. It wasn't a part that was exposed to solar radiation. And I think that the airflow was not as serious in order to create an issue with degradation as you would see on something that was exposed to the elements in a much more obvious way. And of course, another important detail, it wasn't exposed to water either. So since the humidity was not as high as you might expect, I still think that it failed far from the timeline you would expect. So 2 years is almost unthinkable. How I discovered this situation, because I think this is also important. I noticed that when I touched the surface, it didn't spring as it usually did with, I don't know, less than a couple of months before, when I previously checked it. And this accelerated degradation is actually quite possible, because we have to think about a material that doesn't get to have this consistency in a matter of seconds, but however it can quickly advance from a material that is relatively stable to one that exhibits such a low durability or low strength. And this meant that this is how I found it. I touched it and I noticed that since it behaves so much like fresh putty, meaning that you would touch it and you would leave a serious dent in it, I imagine that the material is degraded. So this was the state in which I found it, and I carefully had to unwrap the part that was covered with this so that I could take it away. So ultimately this is what it is. If I can have another important detail, I would say that this process of reversion, as it's commonly called, or when the product actually lost the vulcanization state it previously had, I think it may be due to the lack of proper additives, if some were used, because those additives make the rubber well, actually reach the necessary stability that could be quite predictable over time. Without these additives, the rubber can quickly revert to the previous state when it was not vulcanized, and then it becomes this sticky compound that is quite unsightly, and of course it's quite dangerous in certain areas. So this is what happens. How we can prevent it? Well, unfortunately, we cannot see what is inside those devices, and unfortunately, with poor quality control, this is what happens. You would have to use, let's say, quicker aging methods so that you would find this occurrence with a device before it reaches the a couple of months of age. But this testing is costly, and I assume that they didn't do this, even if that humidifier was made by a reputable European producer. So it doesn't matter. The fact is that these quality control issues can pop up from time to time. Well, this was one of the aspects I presented. The other one would be, obviously, to have good manufacturing control, and the European partner, or just about anyone who could be American or from just about any other country, should be testing what materials are being used. And this would have entirely prevented such a situation. The way in which I solved the problem was not that difficult. I used some polyurethane sheet that I wrapped around that small copper pipe so that it was reasonably insulated. I don't think I have made perhaps the best choice, but I still think it's not a bad repair. So this one isn't quite difficult to make, but unfortunately the way in which such a material degrades is still appalling, and I don't think that it has any sort of reason or excuse for such a product to be used in mass manufacturing. Yet this is what happened. So probably making an expense that was smaller by some cents, whether we are calling it in dollars or any other currency, ended up as being a disaster like this. So ultimately, economies of scale can go in a very wrong direction when careless design and let's say management leads to this. So this is what happened. Ultimately, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm not sure if I will present other such issues, because there aren't many that I have. However, I wanted to make connection, because sometimes you may consider that 5 years is unacceptable for such a rubber degradation issue, and in this case I'm showing you that even 2 years may be too much in such situations, too much of a hope. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like, please subscribe, and there are going to be many other videos that I hope you will enjoy. So have a great day.